Hi guy, welcome back TV spoilers. Young in the Restless Spoilers, Abby could no longer control her emotions. Hatred and the desperate desire to reclaim her son overwhelmed all rational thought. After discovering that Mariah had taken Dominic to a secret location, she acted impulsively, disregarding all previous plans. Her love for her son blinded her, and in her desperation, she became a mother driven by instinct, willing to do anything to get him back. When Abby found Mariah at the secluded house, the confrontation was immediate and intense. There were no greetings, no words of comfort or persuasion. Just cold, determined glares and an undercurrent of hatred. Mariah stood there, unmoving, her face vacant as though she was no longer herself. The image of Ian Ward seemed to possess her, whispering in her mind, urging her to protect Dominic from an invisible danger. Abby tried to approach Dominic, but Mariah immediately pushed her away. She was no longer the Mariah they had known, the sensitive, loving mother. She was now a woman torn apart by hallucinations and fear. Abby couldn't take it anymore. She lunged towards Mariah and a violent struggle ensued. Neither would back down, both as stubborn as wild animals protecting their young. The situation spiraled out of control. In the midst of the chaos, Mariah lost her balance and fell down a stone staircase. Her head struck the ground with a sickening thud, blood immediately spilling from the wound. Abby panicked, seeing Mariah motionless and unresponsive. Everything seemed to fall apart. In that moment, Abby could think only of one thing: protecting Dominic, but it was too late. Dominic, standing nearby, screamed in terror. He didn't understand what was happening, only that he could see both his mother and Mariah in danger. Mariah's condition was critical, but Abby couldn't stop, couldn't quit. She knew that neither of them could go free unless she found a way to rescue Mariah and free Dominic from her influence. But time was running out. Sharon, from a distance, sensed the escalating tension. Mariah's mother could no longer sit idly by. She rushed to the scene, unconcerned for her own safety. Sharon called out to Mariah, hoping to get through to her, but nothing changed. Sharon's heart broke as she imagined her daughter facing a fight for her life. Her calls for Mariah, her pleas, fell on deaf ears. Mariah had lost herself completely, consumed by desperation and haunted by shadows. When Sharon arrived at the house, she saw Abby in a state of panic and Mariah lying motionless on the ground. Sharon rushed forward, her mind spinning, unsure of what to do next. Everything seemed to blur together, as if the entire world was collapsing around them. At that moment, hope seemed lost. Mariah was fighting for her life, Dominic was still not safe, and Abby stood frozen, unable to act. Sharon grasped Abby's hand tightly, the weight of the moment heavy in her chest. No words were exchanged, only Dominic's screams cutting through the silence of the night. A haunting reminder of what was at stake. The situation was growing more desperate, and it felt as if things would never return to normal. Just then, an ambulance arrived. But the big question still loomed: would they be able to save Mariah in time? And Dominic, the innocent child, would he have to endure even more pain from this bloody battle? The tension was unbearable, and it seemed that everything was on the brink of collapse. Dominic was never meant to be more than a casualty in a game far bigger than he could understand. From the moment he was taken, he became a pawn, trapped in a web of deceit and power struggles. The innocence that surrounded him was quickly eroded by the darkness, pulling at the edges of his world. He had no choice but to become part of a plan that involved manipulation and the desires of people much more calculating than him. Mariah, once the caring, loving mother figure, had been drawn into this labyrinth, and Dominic was now an unwilling participant. The twisted hand of Ian Ward, whose influence over her mind grew stronger by the day, made her a vessel for a cause she didn't fully understand. Abby and Devin, unaware of the true depth of the situation, were driven by a singular purpose: to bring Dominic home safely. They had always been there for him, but now they were thrust into a nightmare where they were not just fighting to protect him, but to understand the chaotic forces at play. The phone calls that came at odd hours were not just messages, they were cryptic riddles, soaked in the haunting echoes of Ian's whispers. They knew Mariah was involved, but her behavior was erratic, driven by forces that twisted her once clear judgment. Her mind had become a battleground, and Ian Ward was the manipulative force driving the war. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when Dominic vanished from the Chancellor estate. Panic set in. Abby and Devin's world tilted on its axis. The search was relentless, the fear palpable. Every minute felt like an hour, every lead they followed felt like a dead end. The fear was suffocating. They could feel Dominic slipping away, but they had no idea where he had gone or how he had been taken. The confusion was maddening, and with every passing second, Abby and Devon's bond grew stronger, tied by their shared terror and determination to protect the child who was now lost to them. Mariah's texts were a blur of nonsensical words, punctuated by phrases that seemed ripped from the depths of someone else's mind. Ian's voice echoed through the messages, clouding their understanding. Every message she sent felt like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit, a thread they couldn't unravel. Her words weren't just cryptic, they were manipulative, like a madman's poetry. It was clear that she was not herself. Her voice had become an instrument of someone else's control. The messages spoke of fear, of urgency, of a need to free Dominic from Abby and Devon. But free him from what? They could no longer tell what was real and what was the figment of an unraveling mind. Abby and Devon's worry grew. They knew Mariah had always been emotionally fragile, but this wasn't her. It wasn't just a person spiraling out of control. This was someone being led, someone being used. The words Ian Ward had planted in Mariah's mind had taken root, spreading like an infection. They didn't yet know the extent of Ian's manipulation, but it became clear that Mariah was no longer making decisions of her own. She was following orders, whether she realized it or not. The more they dug, the more they found. It wasn't just Mariah they had to rescue, it was Dominic. But what became painfully obvious was that Mariah had been coerced, pulled into a scheme that involved far more than just her. She had been reduced to a pawn in Ian's game, her every move calculated, her every action driven by a force she couldn't escape. Eventually, Abby and Devon tracked down the hidden location. It was a small, isolated cabin, tucked away in the woods, far from the prying eyes of civilization. And there, in the dim light of that decrepit place, they found Dominic scared, alone, but alive. The relief was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. Mariah, standing in the corner, her eyes wild with the remnants of her battle against Ian's influence, looked at them with a mix of confusion and fear. She was no longer the woman they had once known, but rather a broken shell, a puppet whose strings were pulled by forces beyond her control. Abby and Devon did not know how to help her. They couldn't just let her go, but they also couldn't take her in, not without the full weight of what she had done. They were left with a broken person and a child whose innocence had been stolen from him. Dominic would need therapy and Mariah would need far more. But even as they took Dominic away from the place that had held him captive, they knew there was a greater danger that still loomed: Ian Ward, the mastermind behind it all. The rescue was bittersweet. Dominic was home, but Mariah was not free. She would face the consequences of her actions, but her journey would not be over. She would need healing. And whether she could ever truly be herself again was a question only time would answer. As they walked away from the cabin with Dominic in their arms, Abby and Devon knew that their lives had been irrevocably changed. But the most chilling thought lingered in the back of their minds: what would happen when Ian Ward's shadow finally surfaced, fully realized and free from the chains that had bound him? Would the game truly end, or would it only just be beginning? The truth was far from clear, and in the silence of the woods, a new chapter was about to unfold. Mariah's mind, clouded by the whispers of Ian Ward, was a battlefield. She had always been fragile, but now she was caught in a storm of delusion and manipulation. She truly believed she was protecting Dominic, that she was keeping him safe from forces that no one else could see. Her grip on reality slipped as Ian's voice in her head grew louder, telling her that her actions were necessary, that Dominic's safety depended on her, and that no one else understood the gravity of the danger they faced. But the danger wasn't real. It was a mirage, a nightmare spun from the threads of Ian's twisted influence. The night she left was a blur of urgency and fear. Without a second thought, she gathered Dominic and left the Chancellor estate, slipping into the darkness without anyone noticing at first. Her every move was driven by the belief that she was saving him. In her mind, Genoa City itself was a prison, and the only way to protect him was to run far away from everyone who could interfere. She didn't even stop to think about what she was doing. Abby and Devon, deep in their own world of worry and concern, were shaken to the core when they realized Dominic was missing. They were blindsided by the suddenness of it all. Mariah had never given them any reason to doubt her. She was family, and yet, now, she was the one who had taken Dominic. At first, they didn't suspect her. It didn't make sense. But the panic set in quickly. The house was searched, their calls went unanswered, and the hours dragged by like a bad dream they couldn't wake from. They reached out to the police, filed a missing persons report, and tried desperately to piece together any shred of information. But Mariah, under Ian's grip, was already far away, speeding through winding country roads, convinced that every mile was keeping Dominic safe. The rural landscape stretched out before her, an endless ribbon of dirt roads and empty fields. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound in the car as she drove. Her hands trembled on the wheel, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't let Dominic go back to the world she had left behind. She thought she was being followed, thought she could feel danger closing in. She looked in the rearview mirror but saw nothing. The only thing that was real was her mission to protect Dominic, and everything else was a blur. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence of her mind. The message was from an unknown number, but it felt urgent, almost familiar. The text was brief but to the point, leading her to a secluded location in the woods. She had no reason to question it. Her thoughts were tangled, and Ian's voice whispered encouragement in her mind. "It's where they can't find you," it said. "It's where you can keep him safe." Mariah drove on, her grip tightening around the wheel, her heart pounding. She had to trust this message, had to believe that it was the next step in keeping Dominic from harm. But as she pulled up to the desolate spot, her instincts screamed that something was wrong. The place was too quiet, the air too still. And as soon as she stepped out of the car, she felt something wasn't right. She turned, but it was too late. The trap was set. Figures emerged from the shadows, and before she could react, she and Dominic were surrounded. Panic washed over her as she realized what was happening. This wasn't about protecting Dominic. She wasn't the savior she thought she was. She had been led here, and now, she and Dominic were caught in the snare of old enemies, people who had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The cruel truth hit her hard. Ian's manipulations had led her straight into the arms of the very people she feared. It wasn't just about Dominic anymore. It was about power, control, and vengeance. She had been nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. The realization struck like a blow, and for a moment, she faltered, unsure of how to protect herself or Dominic from what was coming. Back in Genoa City, Abby and Devin were frantically searching for any clue that could lead them to Dominic. Their minds were racing, spinning with fear and frustration. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity. As they pieced together the breadcrumbs Mariah had left behind, the truth started to take shape. The texts, the sudden disappearance side, all pointed to one conclusion: Mariah had taken Dominic. But she was also being manipulated. Someone, somewhere, was controlling her every move. Abby and Devin quickly realized that they weren't just searching for Dominic, they were searching for Mariah too, trying to bring her back from the edge before it was too late. But as they closed in on the location where they believed Mariah had gone, the stakes became clear. This wasn't just a rescue mission. They weren't just saving Dominic. They were facing a deadly confrontation with the people who had masterminded everything. The truth was uglier than they had ever imagined, and the web of lies and deceit stretched far beyond what they had been able to see. Mariah and Dominic were in grave danger. The odds were stacked against them, and the time for hesitation was over. Abby and Devin raced toward the hidden location, determined to bring them back. But the closer they got, the more they realized how close they were to the heart of the conspiracy. And that heart was cold, calculating, and ruthless. When Abby and Devin finally reached the secluded spot, they found Mariah and Dominic cornered, trapped like animals in a cage they couldn't escape. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to grow darker as they realized the full scope of the trap. This was no ordinary rescue mission. This was a battle for survival, and no one was going to walk away unscathed. As Abby stepped forward, ready to confront the hidden enemies lurking in the darkness, the gravity of the situation hit her. This was not just about Dominic anymore. This was about taking back control. It was about exposing the truth and breaking free from the influence of those who sought to destroy everything she loved. But even as she prepared for the confrontation, a chilling thought crept into her mind: what if they were too late? And just as Abby reached out to grab hold of Dominic, a sudden noise shattered the tension, the sound of footsteps echoing in the night. But who would arrive to save them now? Was it too late for a happy ending, or was this just the beginning of an even darker chapter? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as the trap closed in. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.